your source for everything paranormal. Para-X. The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of Para-X, its affiliates, or its sponsors.
Welcome to another Monday night here on the Shadows Radio. I'm Rebecca.
Hey, I'm Vicki.
Yes, that is not Kara. So Kara is once again not with us this evening, but our amazingly, awesomely, superly sexy guest co-host tonight is the lovely Vicki V, joining us from Dark Sun Rising. Hello.
I am so happy to be here.
Yay, it's exciting. I don't think we've had this much sexy on the show in a while.
I know, right? Two of us? My Lord.
We're going to overflow the air. What are we going to do?
Look out, everybody.
And we're talking about the most unsexy topic ever.
I know. We've got to make it sound really good to start off with, though.
Yeah. Well, all right. Let me get the housekeeping stuff out of the way. So if you want to catch up on any of the Shadows Radios that you've missed, you can always go to theshadowsradio.com, click on any of our podcasting streams. We are available pretty much anywhere that you can download a podcast. You can probably find us. So do that, and then all that stuff, like that.
The stuff and the things. Do all the things.
All the things. I'm sorry.
All
it's
the
been
things.
One of those days where, it was really good, and then it was really crappy, and then it was really good, and then it was really crappy, and then at the end of the day, I'm like, wow, the day's over. Holy crap. So,
yeah, that's pretty much
trying to get the head to function properly at this point.
Yeah, it's been a day. It's Monday, and we do what we can.
It is very true. We love Mondays. Mondays are the best.
Okay, let's go with that.
All right, Monday nights are the best.
Monday nights is the best. Monday nights is all the things.
Yes, all the things. All right, guys.
All the things.
So let's talk about the stuff that we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to talk about how you get from the world to the afterlife. So I know it's like a really vague and really wide open thing, but okay, so think about it. When someone says you're going to go down to the afterlife, right?
Mm-hmm.
Generally you think of, okay, well, I'm either going to have a funeral and I'm going to be buried, or I'm going to be cremated, or, if you want to go super hardcore old school, you can say I'm going to have coins on my eyes and be burned on a pyre. Right? Aren't those your...
I mean, I think that covers the majority of the ways, yeah.
Right. That's generally the ways people tend to think of this. But we found some bizarre customs from around the world, from different cultures and religions and all kinds of things, that are really cool ways that people got from this life to the next. So we thought we'd chat about those tonight.
Can't wait. Should be interesting.
Yes. Besides, you're coming from Dark Sun Rising, so we couldn't do a happy topic.
Woohoo! No cannibalism tonight?
I do not do cannibalism.
Okay.
Mr. B and I have had many a conversation about the fact that his email history is, or not email history, but his web host
browser
is probably flagged by 50 different organizations.
Yes, that's why I let him choose the topics and look up the articles.
Yeah.
Because I don't want that on my history.
And never check his Amazon wish list.
That's probably quite scary.
That's just gnarly. All right, so... the first one we'll talk about is not necessarily a way to get to the afterlife, more so to get from your house to the cemetery where you get buried. So the first thing was corpse roads. So that sounds like a really cool band name or like some hardcore metal guy, but it's not. A corpse road is a road that goes from a small outcrop village to a local church. During the Middle Ages, there was one local church and a lot of very spread out villages that would be serviced by this church. And, you couldn't necessarily always get from the church to the cemetery or from the location where the funeral was to the cemetery or the wake or whatever. So they built what they called corpse roads. They were super difficult terrain, because nobody really wanted their corpses going down the common trade route. So they were often sent up and around hills and outcroppings and all kinds of stuff. So it was not an easy way to go. They also was the belief that spirits could only travel in straight lines. So you didn't want to travel down the straight main road that was like, here, between me and the village, straight line that way. Because then the spirit would be like, hey, coming back. But if you followed the corpse road, they would get confused because all the twists and turns and the navigation.
Make them lost so they don't find their way back.
Exactly. So these meandering roads were basically giant labyrinths in and out of major rock outcroppings, up and over hills, kind of bizarre crossroads that really didn't actually go anywhere, just to ensure that the spirit did not return to haunt its previous home. It was also believed that the spirit could not pass through water, and so as a result, many corpse roads would go over streams. Or the river or stream would actually go over the road itself, and you'd have to kind of ford the river or cross over the stream to get to the other side to kind of provide an extra barrier between you and the spirit.
That seems like a lot of work.
Well, we're not done yet. There's so much more.
There's more?
Oh, wait, there's more. You also had to carry the corpse with the feet facing away from the direction of the previous dwelling. So that the spirit, again, could not find its way home, because if it could see the road that it was traveling, it would memorize the route. Whereas if the feet were pointed towards the cemetery and away from the house, the spirit did not know where it was going and could not remember the path. Many of these roads today, however, are gone. So they've kind of been overrun by development and all kinds of things. However, there are a few left in the UK that you can find, and a few scattered through the Netherlands. And they're marked often by coffin stones, which are generally these giant flat boulders that were just set along the way, because when you're carrying a body up and down rocky outcroppings and across rivers and, really awkward places, then things get heavy. So they would put these coffin stones every so often so that you would have somewhere to put the coffin so you could take a break.
So were these stones, did somebody plant the stones there, or these are just like spots that looked good to whoever was carrying this corpse on the road?
So my opinion would be it would be a mixture of both. It doesn't specifically say. I didn't find anywhere that said like they purposely planted them, but I would say it probably was a mixture of both. It probably was a mixture of, over time this one got worn down because it was just in the perfect spot to take a break, and then a little while later they would plant one because there was a big gap with nothing, or something like that. So I would say it's probably a mixture of naturally occurring spots and other things like that.
Now, I find it interesting that they were so concerned about the direction that the body had to face and taking all the funky roads. So I'm assuming that they believe that the spirit stuck around the body and didn't move on immediately.
Yeah, which is surprising because, if you think about the Middle Ages, obviously it's a very spiritual and a very superstitious time. Mm-hmm. But they had a lot of post-death kind of rituals and superstitions and things that, obviously the covering of the mirrors, the opening of the windows, where they believe that the soul escapes. So I'm wondering if this was more of just a safeguard of like, hey, if the spirit didn't get out because I forgot to open the window, just in case, let me point his feet that way so that he can't
break
follow
glass
me
just
home.
in case.
Exactly. It's kind of like one of those things. It's like, maybe this is just a cover your butt kind of thing. I don't know. Maybe.
Okay. I don't know. That seems like a lot of work. It just seems like it's sort of opposite of what the general belief system would lead us to believe at the time. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, people are conundrums. What can I say?
This is true.
I don't know.
That is pretty wild. I don't know. That, like I said, that's an awful lot of work just to get from point A to point B.
Just to make sure that the spirit didn't follow you home, and because you can't walk on the main road with a dead body because, that might deter tourists. Like, that was the whole thing. It was like...
Because tourism was really big back then.
Yeah, don't walk on the main road because nobody wants to see you on the trade road with a dead body. Like, okay, sure.
So let's add 7 hours to our journey just to avoid that straight road. Why not make a different road?
Well, they did.
A regular road, not,
They did. They just made it really windy and hilly and
over the hills and around the bend to Grandma's house we go.
It's from Grandma's house to the cemetery we go. Sorry, Grandma, I love you.
Bye-bye now.
I just imagine them kind of like hiking and being like, is this person really worth it?
Right.
Who is this person?
Must like them a lot.
How much do I like them, and how much do I want to carry them up and over the stupid hill?
Now, does it say kind of how they carry them? Are they on some kind of wagon kind of thing, or are they like literally just, three dudes carrying some guy? And
so based on what I'm reading, I'm going to say it was probably just a bunch of guys hopped a coffin on their shoulders and started marching.
Okay, so they're literally carrying some sort of coffin type thing.
I would say, yeah. I'm pretty sure they're not just carrying
it's not like wrapped in a sheet and just slung over the shoulder or something.
Not like walking along with a body just kind of chilling between them. I feel like
just dragging them behind.
Because it was headed to the cemetery. So I believe, I think the point was to take it from the site of whatever services they had to the cemetery to be interred. So I feel like it was in some kind of container.
So then my next question would be, and not necessarily that you would have the answer to it, but more of your opinion. What kind of distances are we talking that they're literally carrying this coffin?
You ask good questions.
Well, I'm just imagining, because they're out in the middle of nowhere, and, it's miles and miles between, probably from end to end of the town, right?
Yeah.
And so your church is probably going to be a little bit central.
Yeah, so I guess it depends if you're going like a straight, like as the crow flies, or rather the actual path, because as I said, these paths were deliberately windy. There's actually a photo. If you're in the chat room, I'm going to throw it into the chat room. I'm going to try and throw it into the chat room if it lets me. Where it's literally like a hedge maze wrapped around a tree, so you have to go into the maze, wander through the maze, and then come out the other side to keep going.
Dang, that's really a lot. This is like a testimonial to how much you love your dearly departed, by how much work you're willing to put in to get them to the ground.
Yeah, it's that's determination. But
oh wow, okay, so I see the picture you just posted.
Yeah, if you're in the chat room, I did post a picture. That's one of them. This is a copy of this is a one of the coffin stones you can see, where it's basically just a flat boulder. And then the gate to the cemetery. But it says anywhere from, the older established parishes covered about 5 square miles. So, depending on how straight or windy the road was, Yeah,
that could be 5 miles turns into 10.
Yeah, that could be a pretty long way to go.
Shoo. Interesting.
Yep. And if you ever seen the movie Brave, the Disney movie Brave, she talks about seeing blue flames called wisps, and that's like the spirits kind of wandering the world. And people actually believed at the time that spirits who were caught on these corpse roads became those wisps. And they would basically lead people around and, that kind of thing. So I believe also Midsummer Night's Dream had wisps or something like that.
So does the show Once Upon a Time.
Okay, yeah.
I don't know if you're a fan of that, but I just recently watched that episode with the wisps.
I was a big fan of that show until they decided to, change all the characters and start over. It's like, really? What?
I am in season 4, by the way, and completely binge watching them about 5 shows at a time.
Gotcha.
Anyway,
you didn't get to that.
I digress.
So let me know when you get to that part, and then you have an angry.
Okay.
You will have an angry.
We'll have an angry conversation about that later.
Yes. All right, so let's keep going. So let's say that you pass away in Egypt or Semitic areas. What are you thinking kind of would be the way to get to the afterlife?
I'm guessing you're going to be in some sort of sarcophagus and probably, buried in some lovely tomb somewhere.
I wish it was that fun. No,
dang it.
So this is actually pre-sarcophagus and pyramids and things like that. But these people passed away with what they called passports to the dead. It was a small inscribed tablet made of metal, generally of gold, it was tin or gold depending on how rich you were. If you ever heard of the Orphic gold tablets, those are the most common versions of these passports to the dead. But they basically were inscriptions on these tablets that instructed the deceased how to navigate the afterlife, included directions for avoiding hazards such as what response one should provide to a judge should they meet somebody on the road to the afterlife. The passport to the dead, often called a totem pass, was placed in the hands of the deceased and buried with them. But sometimes it was folded and worn around the neck as an amulet or placed inside the diseased person's mouth, or deceased person, sorry, not diseased person. Deceased
well,
person.
Probably why they're deceased, yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah. Placed inside the mouth for the person. But they've been found all over. But like I said, the Orphic gold tablets are the most common, or the most famous of these that have ever been found. They refer to the Orphic religion and mystery cult that was popular among ancient Greeks and Thracians. And they had a lot of secret rites and sharing of hidden knowledge of the afterlife. And they found a large number of these tablets tied to this population of people. However, the geographical area where they were discovered is quite large. They're not necessarily sure if it was, one group of people that were traveling and burying, people all over the place who kind of passed this tradition along, or if it actually was kind of a more commonplace practice than we thought. And they actually stretch about 600 years from the oldest one that we found to the most recent one. So that's a long stretch of time.
It really is, yeah.
And if you look at the tablets, most of them look like they're written in some form of ancient Greek, which is a very specific, lettering style and things like that. But if you could read it, I'm sure it would tell you some really great things about the afterlife. But it basically is like a map. So, like, hey, if you're gonna kick it, we're gonna send you a map to get to the afterlife.
That is really cool, and it's interesting that in this particular sect of people, they are concerned with getting you there. What are you going to do? Here's how you handle it. Whereas the other folks are pretty much like, let's get rid of this guy so nobody follows us.
Yeah, we're done and don't come back. Thank you very much.
Right here, have a nice trip. Bye-bye.
But I think it also ties into the religious practice as well. Because, you think about it. So the British Isles would be mainly, depending, medieval period by then, they're mostly Christians. Right? There might be a few Druids or pagans kind of lingering around, but for the majority of the population are probably some form of Christian. Right? So Christians tend to be a very fearful religion. They fear death. And in generality, and this is a very wide general statement, but middle-aged Christians tend to fear death because that was when they sat in front of God, the judgment, and, they were presented with, what their final determination was. Whereas this passport to the death is coming from people who revered their ancestors. Their ancestors became gods. When they died, they went and they stood in front of some kind of afterlife judge, and they were passed on to the plains of, wherever. I think it was Elysium was the Greeks, I think. But they all basically had these plains of paradise where they were getting passed off to. Nobody really went to fire and brimstone. So I think that also relates to how they're treating their dead. Do you know what I'm saying?
Definitely.
So these people are like, hey, we want to get you to paradise. Here, follow this map.
Right. And here's all the cool things you need to know. And don't forget to tell this person this. And
turn left at Uncle Billy's dog and stop at the general store.
Say hi to Aunt Jane.
And, make sure you say the right words to the judge when he opens the door or whatever.
It's like there's a password and they have it.
But the fact that these things were coated in gold, I wonder if that was integral to the process, or if that was just kind of like a sign of wealth. Like, hey, let me die and have this gold map, or if it was something like, hey, take this gold map and when you get to the end, use this to bribe the guy to let you in the door.
And that does bring up an interesting question, though, because you did say that they were gold or tin, but I'm wondering, is there a different set of rules that were put together for maybe the poor folks and the ones that couldn't afford to even make the tin? Like, how did they get their map, and how did they get their passwords? It's interesting.
I don't know, but I want to be able to read it, and unfortunately...
I know. I'm really sad that there's no translation.
Well, if you're really interested, the worldlibrary.org actually has an entire article about the Totem Pass. And Totem Pass is actually the German term because the first one was actually found in the area of the southern part of Germany. So that's why they got that name. But the Orphic people, who they kind of generally ascribe this to, have spread everywhere from, like I said, from Egypt to ancient Greek, all across the world. But worldlibrary.org has a great article about them with lots of further readings and very deep intellectual thought on that.
Yeah, because I'm very interested to know what, it says, they're learning to navigate the afterlife. So I'm interested to know what the navigation looks like. What kind of stuff are they sharing with each other?
I told you, turn left at the dog.
Pretty cool. That's probably the cat.
No, it'd be the dog, right? Isn't that isn't it Cerberus, right? The 3-headed dog?
Yeah, but didn't they like all love the cats? Weren't they all?
Well, that was the Egyptians. They were all about the cats.
Oh, that's right.
So, I don't know. Well, maybe it's both. Maybe it's like you have to get past the dog and then trick the cat, because cats are smarter than dogs by far.
Yeah, by far. Certainly, well, maybe they're the evil ones. Maybe they're guarding you.
All right, so let's say you made it past the corpse road, you're buried with your map, and you're still stuck. Now what do you do? So the Koreans actually have a solution for you. The Katuku, and I probably just butchered that. It says KKTOKTU, is a small, brightly painted Korean funeral doll made out of wood. It was used to adorn the coffin. They depicted people, animals, mythical creatures, and they were festive and eye-catching. They were not sad. They were not somber pieces. They were bright and shiny and festive. And they weren't just for aristocrats. They were used for pretty much everybody. Anybody who could kind of carve something out of wood was able to have these dolls adorn their coffin. Obviously, the richer you were, the more ornate yours were, but that kind of didn't play a part in everything. They showed a desire of the culture to have their loved ones pass the next world surrounded by care and joy. These festively painted figurines of animals and people were fitted into a bier, which is a movable frame for carrying the coffin or the corpse to the grave, for the purpose of keeping company and guiding the deceased and entering the next world. So if the sorry, I'm going to keep butchering this name. Kutku were shaped in human form. They were not considered human, but intermediaries between the material and the supernatural world. They came in various shapes and forms, most common being what's called a guide figure, a guard, a caregiver, or an entertainer. The guide is portrayed as riding an animal. He leads the soul of the deceased to the other world. The guard is often portrayed as a warrior or an army officer whose job is to protect the soul from evil spirits. A caregiver usually takes on the form of a woman and provides medical care to the deceased as if they were still alive. And the entertainer is often depicted as a clown, an acrobat, or other gesturely figure, consoling the deceased and distracting the mourners from their grief. Oftentimes, animal figures such as phoenix, dragons, and goblins were also popular and symbolize freedom of the soul. So if your map doesn't work, you can always just hire a guide.
Take a dude with you. Now, I will say that the picture that's attached to this specific set of information, that is not a happy-looking guide. That's there. It said they were ornate and and happy, and I'm thinking no.
Maybe
they look a little scary. I don't know. Maybe
tear. Maybe that's what.
Maybe they're the protectors. So maybe that's what that's about.
Yeah, maybe they're more like the warrior figures. I don't know.
They look very serious.
They are very, very serious. But I mean, I like the idea that, like, hey, you don't need your own guide. I don't know. You don't need your own whatever. You just need to have these little people guide you along.
It's kind of like, I don't know, like the little voodoo doll kind of thing, where there's just an attachment of something spiritual to the physical representation.
Yeah, but they're not supposed to be real people, right? Like, I think they're just supposed to be artistic representations of people. They're not specifically certain.
Yeah.
It's not like you've got like a picture of Aunt Susan on your coffin who's going to come down from the death and come get you.
This is still interesting. It still is along the same idea of the guiding into the other realm with some help. Unlike back to our corpse road where they just wanted to get rid of you and never take a chance of running into you again.
But are you supposed to come back? I guess I don't know. I feel like the Koreans. I don't know if they have a real strong ancestor returning in their culture. And that's just my ignorance of their culture, honestly.
Yeah, I'm not overly familiar either. I mean, a lot of the Asian cultures in general are, reincarnation and all that kind of stuff. And
well, there are quite a few of them that believe that, the ancestors live with you for, from now until eternity kind of thing. So I don't know if the Koreans fall into that or, I mean, this is kind of an ancient Korean tradition. I don't know if this is still practiced today. I didn't really see a lot of information when or where this might have faded out, but I don't know. I think it's cool. I want little people on top of my coffin.
Well, I kind of like the idea that they also did like phoenixes and dragons and other types of things.
Freaking menagerie.
I know, you could have a little bit of everything, all kinds of protection and guardianship. And what is the one that's the entertainer? That's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, he's just there to distract you from being sad. Like, don't be sad here. I just have, it says, it comes in the shape of an entertainer, so he could take on an acrobat, a clown, a jester. So you could be anything you want.
So you could have like a whole party going on as you're making your trip.
You could rock it out. I wonder if you shaped one in the shape of like your favorite singer. Like, would that person? Okay, how you doing?
Get some real entertainment as you're going.
I know. I say, if I'm going to go out, I'm going to go out in style.
Right. I'm taking everybody, all the fun stuff with me. Make it good.
Yeah. I don't know. I like this plan. So we're going to go down the corpse road. We have a map. And now we're going to have little people guiding us along.
Right. Now we got the party coming with us.
All right. So let's head to Papua New Guinea. And we'll talk about the kulap. So they were limestone and chalk figurines that were once an important funerary ritual in southern New Ireland and Papua New Guinea. These figures are used to commemorate the deceased and were produced by specialists from the Punam region of the Rosso Mountains where limestone quarries are located. Kulap figures are temporary dwelling places on earth for the deceased, preventing the person's spirit from wandering around the village, causing mischief and harming the living. So, whenever a man or woman from the wealthy family died, a male relative of the family would make a journey to the Rosso Mountains where he would acquire either a male or female kulap, depending on the gender of the deceased. Once back home, the relative would present the kulap to the local leader, who would place it in a memorial shrine alongside any other kulaps. Only men were allowed inside the memorial shrine to view them and perform honorary dances. However, women gathered outside to mourn their dead relatives. When the funerary ceremony was concluded and the kulap figure was no longer needed, it was removed from the shrine and smashed, releasing the soul towards the journey into the afterlife. So kulap figures were eventually abandoned upon the adoption of Christianity in that area in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. So, fun. So basically, you got somewhere to hang out. So
right. So
they want you out of the body because they probably got to do some, prep work for burying you.
Right. So they just kind of, it's like a holding spot.
It's like Airbnb for your body. Yeah.
Okay. So just go hang out in this little kulap for a little while, and
you get to chill in like a little kind of kulap holding cell. Like there's like a general consensus of all the people coming together.
That is interesting. But and then they take them out and smash them?
Well, yeah, because they have to release the spirit, so the spirit can go, the spirit can go on to the next life.
Honorary dances, huh?
I feel like maybe less smashing and more just releasing of the spirit would be the nice way.
Yeah, that makes it seem very like a violent release.
Let's take it out back and, spike it on the ground and send it in shards flying everywhere. Yeah, I don't know. And I feel like that's a little much, but I feel like
that seems a little rough.
I feel like it's more of a gentle releasing.
Just crack them in half.
Smash my.
Be free.
But
no, I wonder now. Of course, our information is partially limited, but I'm curious to know what they think. What kind of journey happens after they're released? Because the other, we were talking about the map with all of the info and your passwords and everything. And these guys are just like, okay, so we had our party and we said you were good, and then we just let you go.
Yeah, there has to be some kind of guide or something going on. I'm trying to scan the information that I have at the same point. So, the shrine, like it says, decorated with leaves of ornate plants. There's a temporary housing for the spirits of the dead, which would otherwise wander, bring harm and misfortune to anyone alive. So they were worried about, the dead relatives coming back and haunting them.
So we're back to the fear.
We are a little bit back to the fear.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because it does say that it was only the wealthy families that were able to do this.
So, yeah, I think because of the amount of effort it took to actually go to the mountain and purchase one,
Right. And have it made or whatever.
And have it made, or I don't know if they were pre-made and you just selected one that you thought looked like your relative.
I'm going to pop over to the Kulap store and then I'll be back in a little bit.
Because I feel like it's not a quick journey. Like this has to be an effort to get and pick up this piece. And then, obviously you have to make your offering to the shrine in order to have your loved one stay there for a little bit. So this article that I'm looking at here, which actually is a book called Oceania, Arts of the Pacific Islanders. There are actually a number of Kulaps in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. So they released this book called Art of the Pacific Islanders. It says that the practice, the figures were actually secretly removed by the men after a certain period of time and destroyed or sold to Westerners. So there might be some spirits still floating around.
That's how we get all those haunted items.
Exactly. You weirdos, you bought haunted dolls.
Right.
But it also says that the Kulaps, say they were reportedly produced by specialists in the likeness of the deceased. However, since the men of the family often were the ones to purchase them, you can guess which piece of the anatomy was oftentimes exaggerated. As these were naked figures. So there are a few examples that you can see that are,
probably a little exaggerated.
The size of his fortune equated to the size of his kulap.
Well, that's not right.
So it doesn't say really how long it had to hang out there or when they decided that they were done with it or whatever, just as a certain period of time. So I don't know.
I would like to know. I would assume that the poor
last
folks
was made in 1910. So they gave them up.
Wow.
Christianity came through.
So do you think the poor folks maybe made their own or had some other similar type of?
I would say, honestly, if it was me and, this is what the rich people were doing and I wanted to do that, I probably would make my own.
Right.
That would just be me, though.
Right. Well, but if that's the part of the tradition as far as their belief system, then I would assume that the non-wealthy folks are having some other type of kulap of their own.
Yeah,
whether it's handmade.
Something like that, because I feel like having a lot of angry peasant ghosts walking around
could not be a good thing.
They're worried about the rich people causing havoc. I wonder what the angry peasant folk would do. So I'm going to say they probably had some form of this, whether whether they were using just a wood statue or something else.
Right.
Unfortunately, there's no information because whatever doesn't survive. So then the Christian missionaries came in, and there went all the tribal culture.
All down the drain.
I feel like that's a common thread.
Yeah.
All right. So do you want to see what the Aztecs did?
Sure.
They had, let's see. So during the heyday of the Aztec culture, when an Aztec of low or medium status died, masters of burial ceremonies, that's a job, master of burial ceremonies. They were called in to perform funerary rites and prepare the body for the afterlife. This includes pouring water over the deceased person's head, dressing the body according to their condition, their fortune, their circumstance of death, and their place in the social stratus. For example, if the deceased had died from overindulgence of alcohol, he or she was dressed with the emblems of the god of wine and drunkards. That is awesome.
Didn't know there was a god of drunkards. At least not one named.
Tezcatzoncatl. I'm sure I just butchered that. Tezcatzoncatl. I feel like Aztec is one of those languages, like once you understand how to pronounce it, it all kind of makes sense, but just trying to cold read it, it's like, what? But
we're going to go with Tezcat.
Yeah, that guy. I'm going to go with God of Wine and Drunkards.
There we go.
So a vase of water would be placed by the corpse to satisfy his thirst during the journey to the afterlife. So if you were so drunk that you died, they would decorate you with emblems of the God of Wine and then give you water. Like, why couldn't they give you beer or whatever? But anyway.
I mean, how can you pray to the god of wine and drunkards and not offer something of that nature?
Yeah. The most significant rite, however, was covering the deceased in a paper made of tree bark known as a matl, often also referred to as a mate. It's M-A-T-E-L. AMATL or AMATE. The use of this specific paper was then explained to the deceased by the presiding funeral official. So basically, they told the dead guy what it was for after he was already dead.
Because he cares at that point.
Well, okay. Let's see what the directions are. So, the first piece of Amato paper was used to pass safely through the two contending mountains. So this is the first step on their journey to the afterlife. The second piece helped the deceased to travel without any danger on the road guarded by the Great Serpent. The third piece allowed safe crossing over the Great Crocodile's domain. The fourth piece was the passport, which allowed the deceased to cross the 7 deserts. The fifth piece was used for a safe passage to the 8 hills. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, the sixth piece was used as defense against the north wind. In addition, for a lighter challenge, the Aztecs burned the clothes and arms of the deceased so that the warmth coming from the burning body might protect the soul from the cold of the northern wind. Yes. So, and that is for, like, it says, I mean, this happened for the low and middle class people. So, like, this is, everybody got this kind of funerary right. So, I mean, I guess there was no class standing. If you're going to go to heaven, you have to have your fancy paper shirt with all of its 6 layers and its 6 pieces of, kind of armor. Mm-hmm. I guess it's kind of like when you're playing, like, those fantasy games and every time you get a new piece of armor, it's like, armor up.
I don't know. I don't play those games.
Oh, well, you should play those games. So
I'm going to assume you're correct.
Just say yes.
Yes.
It's my show, man.
Exactly.
But I like this one because, like I said, it's not super complicated in, like, its actual action, but everyone got it. So it's not just the rich people that got this one.
Right.
Which I think is kind of cool.
It's kind of similar just in its overall thought process as the one with the travel maps, because it's kind of the same idea, but they're a little bit more specific in how they're piecing it together.
Well, they didn't tell you how to get to all these places. They just told you don't lose this level of the shirt because you can't get through without that.
Right, like you've got to have all of these things in order to get to where you got to go.
So, I mean, it kind of is a map, but kind of not. Like, it doesn't actually tell you, like, okay, walk past the Great Serpent and then turn left. And then
I feel like we need the map in conjunction with the suit of armor here.
Right? Yeah, I think we need all of it.
Yes.
I feel like we need
and then the party. We need all the little party dolls.
Yeah. We need all these things. So, I'm going to write this into my will at some point.
Your funerals can be really stinking complicated.
I know. My kids are going to be like, what the hell?
Especially when we have to carry you through the mountains and around the bend.
Yeah, I'm going to just carve a maze into my backyard, walk me down
get some big stones.
But you have to burn my arms and legs like it says in here.
Oh, I don't like that part.
So there's also a part about killing a dog. So I'm going to skip that part because it makes me sad. But
part of
the ritual was killing a dog, and the dog was your guardian through the whole process. But anyway, we're going to skip that part. Poor doggies. Okay.
I know. Yeah, skip that.
So another one that we got is funerary amulets. So this is ancient Egyptians who very much believed that the magical powers came from amulets, most especially good fortune and protection. Those were like their big things. So, whenever you see collections of Egyptian artwork or, jewelry in museums, amulets and beadwork and all that kind of stuff is a huge part of that. Like, they were all about the jewelry. Mm-hmm. And they definitely believed that amulets were worn on your neck, your wrist, your ankles, your fingers from a very young age. If you could afford it, you had one. They were important in death as well as they were to, the living. There were hundreds of amulet options available for funerary use, but ultimately the choice came down to the person's wealth and individual preference. Selected amulets were carefully placed on various parts of the mummy during the wrapping process. They can be placed anywhere on the body, but some actually had very strict and predetermined positions depending on what you wanted them to do. It was important that the priest said the correct prayer and performed the rites as the amulets were placed during the wrapping processes. The most popular amulet was the heart scarab, which is placed over, if you want to guess, the heart.
The heart?
Yes. In order to protect it from being separated from the body in the underworld, as the heart was essential in the weighing of the heart ceremony. If you feared failing this test, they could recite the spell inscribed on the heart scarab to prevent their heart from betraying them. Another important amulet was the amulet of the ladder, which supposedly provided the deceased a safe passage from earth to heaven. And you can actually find mention of most of these amulets in the Book of the Dead. So if you're not familiar with the Book of the Dead, that was the ancient Egyptian kind of guide to the afterlife. Funerary amulets were also used in China in a similar way during the Han period, and earlier cicadas, which was talking about the bug, they make that really irritating sound in the summertime. They were a prized sacred animal, and they symbol representing rebirth and immortality. And the cicadas were immortalized as jade carvings, which were then often used as amulets. And those were placed on the tongue of the deceased to induce resurrection by sympathy magic. So I kind of like this one. This is kind of chill. Like, all right, I know I'm going to go, but in order to make sure I get where I'm going, let me put my cheat sheet in here.
And, I don't think I realized that magic was such a important part of this culture.
Well, there's two separate ones here. So you got China, who very much is into magics and energies and things like that. And then you've got the Egyptians, who basically believe that everything is set one way, but you have to go through the doors to get to the afterlife. If you're familiar with ancient Egyptian, your heart has to be weighed by Anubis, and depending on the good in your heart versus, kind of the bad things that you've done, he will either eat your heart or you will pass on to the next door, in which case then you're, judged by the next thing. And there's I think there's 7 tests total, something like that, 7 or 12 tests that you have to go through to get to the afterlife.
Man.
Yeah, it's pretty intense. And the Book of the Dead actually spells it out fairly clearly. They tell you exactly what to expect at each step and, what you need to do in life to get to that step in we'll call it heaven, or the paradise beyond or whatever. But then once you make it through the fields beyond, the golden fields beyond are supposed to be, basically, heaven, basically paradise, whatever you want them to be.
It's interesting that someone sat down and thought of all of these things and somehow managed to make everyone believe it. And, because that's some pretty specific information. You have to do A, B, and C to get to, door number 2.
Yep. Well, I think I'd prefer it that way. Because we talk about a lot of places and you die and maybe this happens and maybe that happens and maybe you sit down in front of, the deity figure and they weigh you or they judge you or they, make you recite. There was one religion, I remember in college I had to look up different religions' death passages or whatever, and I can't remember exactly what it was, but I want to say that it was in Northern Africa. There was a tribe in Northern Africa who believed that basically when you died, you sat down in front of the deity, and your job was to write out all of your sins. And if you forgot a single sin in the writing of your life, then you went to their version of hell.
Man, that's tough.
Did not pass. That was it. You had to remember every single sin and admit to every single sin and spell them all out. And I'm like, wow.
That's hardcore.
I don't even remember what I did for lunch yesterday. You want me to remember every
much less
single
what
sin
stupid thing I may have done when I was 6.
Exactly, yeah. So I wonder if there's some loopholes in that plan.
I would hope so. Sheesh.
Somehow you get full memory recall when you get to the end or something.
There's one guy in heaven, according to them, and everybody else, missed one.
Yeah. One of them things. I don't know. That would be pretty funny to get there and there's nobody else there.
There's one guy way over there. He's just been waiting.
And you're sitting there well, where's everybody else? Well, they're still writing. But then I wonder, at least in that case, if you wrote and you said, okay, I committed, 5,000 sins in my life, and you're a pretty terrible person.
Right, but if you remember them all, does that get you there?
Exactly. I don't remember specifically, and it's killing me right now that I can't remember, so I can't Google it really quick while we're talking. But you have 5,000 sins and you write all 5,000 down. Are you forgiven for all those sins, and you still get to
Is
go,
it automatic just because you remembered them?
Yeah, I wonder.
Well, that's funny, and I don't know if you, Kat in the chat room is talking. She says, "Yeah, just forget the good as long as you remember all the bad stuff," which is so opposite of the way you're taught to live, in general. And I would assume that even in those religions, those places, it's still about, do the good things and be a good person and all of these wonderful things. Why is that not part of the judgment? It's kind of a shame,
Yeah, and I don't know. It makes me feel like there is another part to it that maybe we didn't cover in that class.
Okay. It's way more fun to think of it this way, though.
It's kind of bizarre. I mean, I think part of what it was is like, we were talking about the weighing of the heart. We were talking about how, in Greek you have to pay the ferryman, and the more sins you have, the heavier you are, so the more you have to pay the ferryman, kind of thing. So I don't know. It's interesting, but I feel like everyone's kind of got these weights and measures at the end of everything. Yeah. But now I'm finding out that other people have maps,
right? Maps
or cheat sheets, or
passwords and totems and all kinds of stuff.
The ancient Egyptians were literally writing the answers on the inside of these amulets and sticking them like, all right, here, I'm going to slide the answers. Let me just write them on your arm, so when you get there, you're good. Right. I feel like if that's the way, it might be cheating.
Just a little bit. Does that go on the list of sins?
Yeah. So does that count? Okay.
But back to your point that you said that you kind of like the idea of having it all spelled out, which is kind of interesting also, because it certainly takes out the guesswork of
what's
living your life however you live your life. But as long as you remember steps A, B, C, and D, you can get where you got to go.
It's a good point. I didn't think of it that way. I thought of it more as like people fear what comes next. Mm-hmm. Everyone, I mean, whether you admit it or not, at some point in your life, you sat down and thought about what comes next, and you probably were a little afraid.
Right.
Whether you were 6 or 66, at some point you had that fear. For me, I had it very strongly as a kid. Mm-hmm. Like, I mean, I never wanted to kind of hit the what comes next phase. Like, I never wanted to know. And then I got into this stuff, and, it kind of opened up a whole new thinking about it of like, okay, well, what's going to happen is going to happen. So let's just go with it. But I feel like having these things written out, like, okay, I'm going to put a map in your mouth and you're going to be fine.
Right. Kind of allays the fear. And
I think it does.
You know exactly what to expect and how to expect it.
Exactly. I wonder if that's part of it, is that, okay, you may not fully know what's coming next, but at least you know that somebody's got your back.
Right.
So.
That's an interesting way to look at it for sure. Because it seems like it comes from a place of fear when you kind of look at it on the outer levels. But, even just what you're saying, I mean, that makes a lot of sense, where this is the way that they helped ease people through and made them feel as though, okay, now I know exactly what I have to do and it's all going to be okay. And there's nothing unknown about it.
Very true.
Very interesting.
Well, we got time for one more if you want to hit one more.
Go for it.
All right. So the last one comes to us from the Mayans. We talked about the Aztecs. Let's talk about the Mayans. So they believe that the world after death, also known as Xibalba, Xibalba, which is also known as the place of fright, which super happy sounding.
Right back to where we were before.
Yeah. So this is actually a place of terror. So it has its own landscape, gods, and bloodthirsty predators. And the Maya did not believe that it was possible to truly escape Xibalba, since mistakes and slip-ups are part of human nature and thus completely unavoidable. Only those who died violent death could truly avoid the place of terror. In Mayan culture, the deceased were often buried with maize, corn, placed in their mouth, which served as nourishment for the soul's difficult journey through the terrifying lands, and also served as a symbol of the soul's rebirth. It's not surprising that they chose maize as their crop of choice in sustaining the soul, since the Mayan diet consisted primarily of maize, squash, and beans. It's believed that combined planting was common in ancient times, meaning that the maize acted as a pole for the beans that twined around it, and the squash trailed around in between. In addition to maize, the mouth of the deceased was often filled with one or more jade beads that were supposedly used as currency for the journey. While others argue that a single jade bead in the mouth of the deceased equaled an endless supply of maize. So, depending on kind of like who's doing the explanation, either the jade beads were meant to kind of buy your way through as safe passage, or possibly they were symbolic of a lifetime supply of maize for your journey. But it's
to hell, apparently.
Well, no, through. So.
Okay.
So the idea for them is that, when you die, you went to this place of fright, Xibalba, and only the truly worthy actually made it all the way through to the paradise on the other side. And they never really explained what's like what's outside of it. They basically because since most people don't make it all the way through, you kind of can't avoid the space. So, but at least they gave their ancestors and their deceased ones some nourishment for the journey. Because
you're gonna get hungry when you go fight all the beasts.
Yeah, and I've actually read quite a bit about the Mayan culture in this respect, where they have, when they talk about their own landscape, their own gods, they have predators. I mean, it's not a pleasant place. And I mean, it's kind of like a final test and journey for your soul where, okay, I went through the human part. Now I need to test my soul kind of thing. It's scary.
That is rough.
Yep. It's, yeah.
Just like, obviously the idea is to make it through the rough part to get to good stuff on the other side, but dang. As if life wasn't hard enough. Now, I guess, and I kind of like the idea that you get a pass if you happen to die a violent death because you've already been through.
Yeah, you've been through
all this horrific stuff, so they let you, slide on that one.
Yeah. So, let's see. So the Mayan cosmology has 13 levels of the upper world, 9 levels of the lower world, and then they have their existing world. So there's a very complex structure of kind of what makes up where we are and kind of where you go and the next level kind of thing. But it also fans from their great fear of death as a culture. So, they defined death as kind of excessive, honestly. It's an excessive fear. And they basically took their death funerary rites extremely seriously. They threw everything at it. They honored the gods for health, life, sustenance. So when it came time to die, the sorrow and wailing that was assigned, the louder people cried for you, the more they missed you, and therefore the more respected you were. So there was a lot going into it. And then, like I said, they got these jade beads for kind of passing their way. There was also people who would fast, depending on which relative passed away. So if your husband or wife passed away, you fasted for days, if not months, and that they would claim that the evil spirit came to take them away. They had people swearing abstinence, celibacy, depending on who passed away. So this is a culture that put a lot of fear behind the concept of death. It wasn't just, oh my gosh, you die, you go to the next place, you fight your way through, and everyone's happy. No, you went to a really nasty place because they were terrified of what came next. Probably because they didn't understand. Mm-hmm. And honestly, I think that's a fairly common thing for most people. If you don't understand what comes next, that's what you tend to fear. You tend to fear the unknown. So,
well, it's also interesting that in some of the cultures that we've talked about tonight, there's such a vast difference between how they look at the unknown, and some are embracing it as a journey into the next realm and new energy and all good things. And then you've got these guys that are so terrified that they are embracing only the negative. And, you might get lucky and make it through that to get to the other levels. And it's just interesting to see how differently they looked at it.
Yeah, it's definitely, I don't know. It's fascinating to look at ritual of any kind that kind of cross cultures and see kind of where everybody lines up together and where people trying to take these weird kind of veering offs and what causes that culture particularly to make that weird veer. Like, why did you turn left here? Like, why?
Right.
And why,
why did this become so negative? Like, what was happening?
Exactly.
When this kind of was created.
Yeah, and I think it happens a lot where it's like, okay, there's 7 cultures standing here. You all have the exact same ritual up to this point, and then all of a sudden culture number 6 kind of takes a weird left turn, and they're way over here, and everybody else is still going straight. So what happened to those guys?
Right.
And I find this stuff, and I find it fascinating.
Well, and I just as sort of an ending thought, I think I'm most fascinated by our corpse road because it's so benign and selfish that I feel like there's much more to that sort of story, shall we say, than all of the other ones. Because the other ones really were much more specific in the thought processes as to why they do what they do. Whereas this is just get rid of the guy, don't let him follow, and hope for the best. And no conversation as to what really happens after.
Yeah,
I don't know. I just found that fascinating.
You're right. It is the one that seems to be based on the living rather than kind of guiding the dead to the next world.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's selfish Brits. No, I'm just kidding.
Damn white people.
As I look at the listener list, and there's somebody listening to us from the United Kingdom. Hey, do you know any corpse roads near you? Let us know about that. But Miss Vicki V, thank you for hanging out with us this evening and filling in.
You are quite welcome. It was fun as always.
And I guess I'm going to turn the microphones over to the Dark Sun Rising crew, and they will take you on to the next level of this journey, hopefully with a map and other things, and no cannibalism.
I need a map and a password, please.
Eric B. just walked into the studio. I said no cannibalism. He turned around and walked out. He's very sad. But as always, I'm Rebecca.
And I'm Vicki.
And we'll see you in the shadows.